Hello, my name is Elena Green, and this is a guided meditation for depolarization and deprogramming to teach the brain how to abstract absolute truth from all the information we receive on a daily basis in the realities that we reside in. It is all these things and more. If you haven't done so already, it is of absolute importance to take your time to read the description and warnings of this video before proceeding. Please respect this process, and please remain awake for the duration of this video, and try to keep your focus on the words that are being said. Please allow this video to run in its entirety. If you miss something or want to hear it again, resist the urge to stop, pause, and play back. Keep going all the way until the end. And don't worry, every word is being recorded in your subconscious as I speak and can be accessed at any given time as needed. And also, please take the time to set up a designated, sacred space, gathering everything you'll need to be comfortable and relaxed for the duration of this video. The importance of why you'll need a clean body and even a cleaner, decluttered area set up to listen to this is further described in the description. Are you ready? Close your eyes. Take a deep breath and set your intention. What do you want to get out of this? Why are you here? Why are you doing this? The easiest and fastest way to get into the meditative state of mind is to simply listen. Take a few deep breaths to let go all the effects of the day. Breathe in and breathe out to let go all of the effects of the week. Another round of breath to let go all of the effects of the month. And as you move into the next round of breathing, you exhale, letting go all of the effects of this past year. As you continue to breathe, take it a little bit further and exhale, letting go of all the effects of this entire lifetime, all the way from birth up until now. With each breath, it becomes longer and more exaggerated, extending your inhales and taking your time on the exhales. And on your next exhale, consciously let go of everything to happen in the future, leaving that all behind. As you continue to deepen your breath, we move along. Get all the wiggles out and settle yourself in. Take a few more deep, long, relaxed breaths to let go of any tension in your body. Keep breathing until you get to a place where your body parts are no longer moving around or fidgeting, just still. Relax deeper and deeper down with each breath. There is no rush here. We have all the time in the world, and we will spend most of it right here at the beginning, working on shutting down the overactive body. So set your overactive mind to the side for now, so you can work on the body first. Quiet the body, not with the mind, but with the breath. Allow your breath to return to normal, breathing however your lungs want to breathe. Just let it go on autopilot. Trust in the brilliance of your body, that it breathes all on its own, without your control, without you having to think about it. This is for you. Let your breath be your guide by letting the breath go and just watching it, letting go of control. Rest and trust the feeling of your chest automatically expanding and contracting. Listening to the sounds as you inhale and exhale. Noticing the air, prana, life, energy, oxygen flowing through your nose, down your throat, into your lungs, filling your needs automatically. Watch as the exhale dispels stale air, blowing away what you no longer need and what no longer suits you. The breath is a dance, the push, the pull between the polar opposites of each other. They work together. You need both. One cannot exist without the other. Bring your awareness into your body now. Scan from head to toe, looking for any tension that may or may not be there. If there is tension, release it, relax it, and let it go. Notice any holding patterns in the body without any judgment or good or bad. Just notice it and let it go. Moving on. Feeling your body relax as you let go a little bit more and more with each breath you take. Let your eyes relax back into your head and put them to sleep. You won't be needing your eyes. The eyes stay locked in a relaxed place. Still. Relax your forehead and brow. Let any tension between your eyes or on the bridge of your nose just fall away into nothingness. Feel your temples and the top of your scalp relax down, exploring any sensations you feel within your body right now. Feel your mind relax in your skull. The more you relax, the more your mind expands. And the more your mind expands, the more your body relaxes, until you reach a point where you may not even feel your body anymore. One cannot exist without the other. It is what day is to night, hot from cold, black from white. How would you know what pleasure was if you never knew pain? They go together. They are one of the same thing, and you need both to balance. Two sides of the same thing, two halves to make a whole. Two pie shapes that come together to make one circle. So where in that equation do you want to be? And how would one achieve this? In any moment, whatever comes your way, you stand in the middle, being non-judgmental towards whatever it is. You can see both sides. And then you fill your heart with gratitude to let it go, moving on and into the next moment. Repeat. Life is a dance of pushing, pulling, giving in, and letting go. Feeling love and being grateful. Try to remember what life was like before the concept of good or bad, all the way back to when it was just what it was, without judgment of good or bad. Leveling out the playing field by, instead of approaching situations with judgment of good or bad, you look at the idea being presented more like a negotiation where we can accept or reject it. By training your mind to think this way, you expand your thinking by twice its size, and are then able to determine right knowledge from perceived knowledge. Begin to watch your thoughts. Disengage. Allow the thoughts to pass without trying to name it, analyze it, find a reason for it. Let it pass without chasing it. See what thoughts appear next. Let the moment go and move into the next, and so on, so on, and so on. Breathe in to receive. Breathe out to let go. Reject and banish away thoughts that come into your mind that you don't want any part of. Thoughts present themselves as a negotiation. There's no need or reason to judge them good or bad. It is either something you accept or reject. You have that power to do so. No thought can manifest into form if you reject it. The second part of knowing this is how to protect yourself by setting up a defense strategy. It's a lot like putting on armor or setting up a force field like a shield around you. Some imagine an indestructible bubble around them and even around their loved ones, where you can see out, but nothing can see in. It's unpenetrable. Anything coming your way will just bounce off, and ultimately will be returned to the sender, wherever it is it came from. Ground yourself solid by imagining your feet are firmly planted into the ground and are growing roots that are so strong and so deeply connected that they reach all the way down into the center core of the earth. Continue to breathe deeper and longer, and relax your body down, down, down. Let's begin to explore the mind by talking about symbols and how they affect our thought processes. Our experiences in the world are undeniably distorted by the processes of our own perceptions. Imagine for a moment that you're walking down a busy street. There's far too much happening with the hustle and bustle for you to be completely aware of everything that is going on. And although a faint sliver of the overall totality of all that is happening on the street gets through, still a great deal of raw, unprocessed information is reaching your nervous system via your sense organs. And out of that great mountain of information, only a small amount of that is going to pass into the threshold of your conscious awareness. And this is the point where you might begin to notice and describe what is happening to yourself, converting all of that information to more or less recognizable chunks. Out of these chunks of recognition, you might then begin to interpret and describe to yourself what is happening. Thus we begin an internal narrative. And who knows, maybe 24 hours from now you might be left with only a faint recollection of what actually happened. In a few weeks it is highly unlikely you'll be able to remember anything at all, other than perhaps the faintest impression of what was happening as you were walking down the street. So we are limited by the very structure of our own highly specialized nervous systems. And at each successful level of abstraction, we're taking away from the whole of reality itself. New distortions are introduced. And that's not to say that our experience of the world is made up entirely of illusions, but just the distortions in our perceptions brought about by the process of abstractions are inevitable. If we were flying a plane and all the dials on the dashboard were providing incorrect information, we'd be very likely to run into trouble. So it's really in our best interest to remove as much of the distortion and illusion from our lives as possible. And the first step in this process is to become more aware of what those distortions are. In order to survive as a physical being, we need to pay very close attention to the information that we are receiving through our sensory organs. Light bounces off and emits from objects in our vicinity and then reaches our optical nerves in our eyes, and from this we create a constant visual map of our surroundings. And likewise, sound waves reach our ears along with other senses to help us build up a picture of what's going on in this physical world around us. But this information can only tell us about the exterior reality of our environment. Our picture of the world is constructed out of a multitude of impressions that consists entirely of the outsides of things. And the interior reality of what it's like to actually be something other than ourselves, like another human being, or even an animal or an object, can never be known directly via our sensory impressions alone. The scientific method, being a systematic, empirical study of the physical world built up over several centuries, has definitely helped us to stay warm, healthy, comfortable, entertained, and even amused, and we owe a great deal of our well-being to science and technology. But it's worth making the distinction between the scientific method, which works on the assumption that there is a real, knowable world out there that rational beings might be able to agree upon, and the more formal kind of scientific realism, which goes quite a bit further in making very bold claims about the actual ontological status of external reality. Scientific realism can be seen as a very sharp contrast to those ideal holistic philosophies that claim we're really living in a world of mere illusion and apparition, and that the universe is essentially immaterial and just a construct within mind. So we've got two extreme views. In one extreme view, the external world known to our senses is recognized as being real, and in the other extreme view, only the inner world of conscious awareness is considered to be real. But of course, there is less dualistic ways of looking at life that recognizes the validity of both the inside and the outside of reality. We will come back to that concept later. One danger in believing simply that the world described by science is the real world is that it tends to substitute the inevitably complex reality of what's actually going on with a consensus view that's made up of a bunch of commonly accepted working theories about what's going on. And likewise, it's rarely useful or even possible for scientists to examine the phenomenology of the inner experience of the world. For example, we might be able to hook somebody up to a brain imaging apparatus while they're meditating and see perhaps unusual neurological activity, but again, that's just looking at the outside of things. Our thoughts have got a physical, measurable, observable core alert that can be measured, but these are not really exactly the same thing as experience of actually having those thoughts, and neither are they completely separate. They're the inside and the outside of the same thing. A distortion arises when we start to believe that the external world is more real and that our internal experience is less real. It might be that the nature of mind is such that it cannot really remain still and quiet for very long. It's always intentional. It's always directed towards some other kind of internal or external form. Always having to be aware of this or that. And certainly the human mind's most valiant attempt to assimilate nothingness tends to involve visualizing expanses of blackness, which of course is still something. So our everyday reality is heavily influenced by that post-enlightenment scientific method. And this everyday reality places an enormous emphasis of information that reaches us via physical sense organs by what we can see, touch, etc. Even when this involves using sophisticated measuring devices or ultra-powerful microscopes, for instance, it's still ultimately preoccupied with looking at the outside of things, how they appear as objects in the physical world. Introspection has taken an increasingly backseat role in the pursuit of knowledge in comparison with neurology and brain science. If a person reports that they've had an experience that contradicts consensus reality, and then scientific logical response would be to place the burden of proof on those person, to devise some kind of reliable experiment which can repeatedly and reliably demonstrate that the consensus reality is wrong. And of course, this level of scientific rigor makes it virtually impossible to demonstrate proofs for internal experiences which are luminous and spiritual, transcendental in nature in itself. And then that vast tower, multi-dimensional reality collapses down into a single-story dwelling where we fall prey to the illusion that the only reality is physical reality. Many people are convinced that consciousness itself is only an epiphenomenon, an accidental byproduct of those chemical processes going on in the wetware of our brain. A meaningless array of outer experiences like empty shells. And this ultimately is the danger of the illusion that everything that is physical. And the flip side of that is that the physical world is entirely made up of mind. So our challenge then is to learn how to discriminate between the real and the unreal, and to get into grips with the hard and heavy realities of this physical world. Ultimately, we can't bypass the lessons of our physical incarnation. We keep waking up in our bodies over and over again. We have to take care of our physical needs and look after our bodies. As above, so below, as within, so without. Like the flame that rises up from the candle, that aspect of our spirit which lives in the non-physical worlds, requires our body and nervous system in order to do its thing. Take away the body physical, and a great deal of what we cherish as ourself disappears too. Bring your awareness to the middle of your mind. What do you see there? Set your awareness here, in the middle of the brain, between the two halves, locked in place. Now try to remember back to a time when you felt overwhelmed and overcome by emotion, and it felt as if your heart was about to burst out of your chest. This could be anything, a person, place, thing, event. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. What matters is that physical feeling manifested in your body. And even more importantly, we need to be able to conjure up that feeling to connect to it at will on command. If you never had anything like that happen to you, or you felt overwhelmed by compassion, then remember a time when you've had butterflies in your stomach. That physical feeling, that tickling in the belly, was a manifest form from a thought. You thought of something and it became matter. Mind over matter. This is the mathematical equation. Mind, draw a line under and write matter underneath it to represent mind over matter. If you don't mind, it won't matter. Let's go deeper into this mind now, into the area where our security kicks into gear. Considering how our own idea of security is a strong foundation that somehow weaves and binds together the rest of the world as it receives and influences, it still manages at the same time to be incredibly illusory. Initial experiences of security are usually all about appearance, glamour, and transformation. Sometimes we encounter security like a magical hall of mirrors or secret tunnels. And when we first go exploring in the bowels of our own mind, our security somehow manages to make it appear to be like a shimmering, fascinating, glamorous, seductive labyrinth of dreams. And indeed, this spiritual experience is that of a vision of the machinery of the universe, now from the perspective of being at the very nadir involuntary arc, i.e., when we've completed the path of descent from spirit into dense matter, it appears to us that we can experience and understand the entire universe. But because we are now at the base of this pillar of our consciousness, it acts as kind of a receptacle for the emanations that are above, and then channels all the influences so we can perceive them in a recognizable form. But what we are really seeing are just reflections in the mirror of our own securities. We create a simulacrum of the universe in our own imagination. And because we are creating it for ourselves, we can make it as neat and tidy or as messy and random as we want. It's only when we begin the outward journey, continuing evolution up, that we burst our bubble of security, and we have to let this illusion go to encounter what is next after that and what is real. We know that making repetitive patterns will produce a groove that makes tasks easier and easier over time, and at first we might be aware of these patterns, and then after a while they become so stereotypical that our focused awareness will start to seek novelty, and we begin to notice other things. What was once at the very forefront of our emerging consciousness is now taken for granted. It's become a given, and in a way we are like spiders wandering around on our web of our own making, and these webs appear to have always been there. And it seems as if they'll always be there in the future. However, they're constantly being destroyed and recreated. The illusion of security is that things are going to stay the same, that our usually comfortable headspace will be fundamentally remaining unchanged. And yet we all need a place to live, whether it's a house, castle, cave, cocoon, tent in the desert, shelter that we live in must at least be temporarily stable and secure. And it's got to protect us from the raw power of the elements. But no matter how strong or secure our shelter seems, it can never be permanent constructions. In time, every tower has got to crumble. And our egos can create a false identity that is comforting, but we will come back to that later. At this level, ego tends to fight back with a vengeance whenever it is challenged. For example, if we encounter somebody who is more clever or more talented than us in some way, or excels in some capacity that we think we've got, we feel an unreasonable urge to undermine them somehow instead of simply accepting that this is so. We feel unduly threatened because actually on some level our very existence might be at stake. And this inevitably stops real change. The cocoon of our ego becomes a prison cell, and we get trapped in our own protective shell. And we all need to undergo major changes from time to time, and that process can be more or less traumatic depending on how attached we are to the status quo of our current situation. The only way we can really overcome the illusion of security is by learning to trust in the very foundation of our being. And that's not to say we should lively ignore the fact that there is pain, suffering, and confusion in the world, but we have to learn to trust in ourselves, both in our intrinsic pure nature and in the strength of the unfolding self-writing nature of reality. The illusion of mapping. Form manifests as an ever-increasing granularity and detail in complex structures and the capacity to differentiate and categorize all those different aspects of the world. More importantly, our own brain gives us the ability to make maps out of the world, and if we're not careful, to live in them rather than living in the world as it is. Maps provide information rather than knowledge. If we think of a human being as being a microcosm of the whole universe and therefore being its own tree of life in its own right, then a person's map manifests as intellectual capacity and the ability to hold and construct beliefs about how the world is, including memories of how the world used to be and plans of how the world might be in the future. These beliefs range from our core assumptions about the nature of how things are to everyday working assumptions about what's going on. And because the world is changing all the time, it's really important that we are able to flexibly adapt our beliefs and maps of the world as an ongoing process. When we don't have personal experience of something, we tend to look to established forms of learning for answers, i.e. books, libraries, and from established authorities like university professors or the sages of antiquity. Because this area of our consciousness is at the base of the pillar of form, it tends to relate to learning in a very passive, almost negative way, like as if a pupil would respond to a teacher, because he has to. And in many traditions, historically, there's been a very strong tendency towards unquestioning figures of authority. For example, the Picatrix will instruct us that such and such plant belongs to such and such planet because such and such sage says it does. So depolarization allows us to respond easily to some of the more obvious pre-rational, pre-modern, pre-scientific material in an intelligent way while still making use of that tradition. But for more insidious and difficult to tackle are the root assumptions about the fundamental nature of reality that we've received from our own tradition, without wanting to remove the core sense of design and purpose of the world that underpins our consciousness. What is based on some ancient ideas will need to be developed further in order to integrate it with more recent developments in our evolution and understanding of the world. Maps don't show absolutely every detail about the territory they represent, but rather only those things that are relevant to the map's purpose. A good map is a deliberate act of abstraction. We need to be conscious abstractors, aware of the nature and purpose of the maps that we are creating. The illusion of rigid order gets mixed up between our representation of reality and the reality itself, and then believing that when reality contradicts our own internal map, the reality must be wrong. Some so-called rational people can have very fixed beliefs which are actually irrational. One's ideas can get calcified over time, just like stone, and becomes rigid. Another component of this illusion misconception that analysis is somehow equivalent to control, i.e. because we're able to dissect things in our heads and break them down into their component parts, that somehow we have control over them. And admittedly, this is an important process in developing technology and our ability to work in the world, but our conscious function doesn't always realize when it's out of its own depth. And this is especially so when the intellect attempts to analyze emotions. I'm not talking about using a cognitive behavioral approach to be more aware of one's own dysfunctional schema, but rather the particular tension that occurs when we're overwhelmed by a really strong feeling, and instead of simply accepting and experiencing our emotional state until it moves on, we try to dispel the uncomfortable feeling by retreating into our intellect and analyzing it to death, trying to verbalize the non-verbal, trying to convert feelings into words because words are easier to manipulate. What is this that I am feeling? What is the reason for this? There must be a reason. I must understand the process. Again, the illusion occurs when we believe by relentlessly analyzing something that we can have some kind of control over it. It's worth noting that sometimes people can start off mentally flexible and then become worse over time. For example, experts can get stuck in the paradigm of the era in which they originally did their research degrees and had their breakthroughs in. And even though many further developments have taken place in their field, they feel a very special affinity and attachment to all the hard work they did at a particular time, at a particular place in the past, and so they are unable to move on with the times. The illusion can become a trap and lead us into negative self-fulfilling prophecies. Our beliefs affect our perceptions, which in turn reinforce our beliefs. So what is the antidote to this illusion? Well, we need to be aware of our own fallible mapping process. We can develop an increased awareness of our own mapping systems, and part of this could help in visualizing a large garden which represents your own beliefs. And inside this garden there is a multitude of flowers, plants, and trees growing, and each of them represents an idea or belief that we hold. By going in and cultivating the garden, planting, pruning, weeding, and so on, we are actually changing the way we think. And this can carry over into our everyday life, creating permanent, beneficial changes. And we can practice something called counter-attitudinal advocacy, and that is spending time deliberately playing devil's advocate, thinking about and appreciating beliefs that are counter to our own. The cognitive dissonance that this produces can actually lead to a moderation of our more strongly held views, but ultimately this illusion needs to be shattered if we are going to continue a pattern of lifelong learning and be of use to the powers that be. Let's move on into the illusion of the feeling that one knows or recognizes what the world and the people in it are really like. It's distorted by our own needs and desires. It's from this illusion that we evaluate and project upon people, places, and things, and then judge them accordingly. This is the part of ourself that deals with energies and forces. It's fluid, energetic, and although it can be illusory, it's often connection with genuine empathy and sympathy, so it can be a force of unselfish love, but if unbalanced, it can become appalling selfishness, depending on the circumstances. Stemming from still looking for someone or something outside of ourselves that is going to be our salvation, that will somehow bring us back into that state of grace and well-being. We're looking for something to help us feel connected, whole, and complete. Because when we don't have a conscious connection to the source, we feel like we are missing out on something of vital importance. And so this projection is based on desire, but it's still containing a few flickers of real intuition and inspiration. And this is what makes it even more seductive and compelling. When projection occurs in relationships, it tends to lead to a kind of emotional fusing whereby it becomes difficult to really tell where one person ends and the other person begins. In intimate relationships, it can be really hard to resist the inclination to project one's own inclinations onto one's partner. So there's this key concept in the psychology of Carl Jung, which is that of the major archetypes. One of these major archetypes is that of the anima, or the idealized woman. Now, the anima actually exists somewhere out there in the liminal realm of the collective unconscious, but she is activated when a typically heterosexual male feels he cannot live out his own feminine qualities, and they become, to an extent, repressed. And because of this repression, he begins unconsciously to project out his own anima, i.e. what he thinks a woman should be like, onto the female he becomes involved with, irrespective of her actual personality. He might have an expectation for her to demonstrate all sorts of emotional sensitivities, glamour and nurturing abilities that he feels he cannot himself manifest because of his maleness. And likewise, she may in turn project an equivalent archetype counterpart onto him, expecting him to be her knight in shining armor. Everything she feels males ought to be, but of course she can't be because she's a real woman. Animus projection is not only limited to opposite gender roles, it occurs in same-sex relationships and in couples who like to think of themselves as a very liberated and modern couple. One can end up responding to an archetype rather than to an actual loved one as a real person. And we can see how this might cause all sorts of problems and is basically an insidious and selfish process. There are lots of other types of emotional projections, and they all pretty much involve displacing the aspects of our own personality which have not been integrated onto other people, places, and things. The two most salient ones to mention here also are the persona and the shadow. The persona is literally our mask. It's the plausible version of ourselves that we represent to the outside world. It includes all of what we see as our positive traits and qualities, and it's designed to make an impression. But if we're not careful, we can start to believe the hype and think that we actually are our own persona. The persona can manifest in people who think of themselves as spiritual in the form of relentless self-improvement because they will not allow for their own human frailty. They might even make a projection of a vision of perfection onto a parent, lover, child, teacher, and so on. And on the flip side of that persona is the shadow, which is the archetype of all that dark stuff we don't want anyone to know about us. But not everyone's shadow is a devil-type character. For someone who outwardly presents as being powerful, ruthless, Machiavellian, their shadow might actually be weak and vulnerable. When the shadow is unconscious, it's usually encountered in a projected form as other people's faults. And indeed, when other people's personality traits really wind us up, it can help us learn much more about our own shadow side. It's worth paying attention to the way that society creates semi-mythological pariahs like Bin Laden and then turn them into folk devils, because this says a lot about the collective shadow of the societies that we live in. Apart from the heavy power play of the major archetypes, we need to be aware that working with projected illusions can be immensely energetic, and this energy creates very strong emotions. And we all know that mood and emotions are going to color our perceptions of the world and the people in it. When you are smiling, the whole world smiles with you, or at least so it seems. We project our own mood onto other people. If there's any antidote to this illusion, it's the combination of unselfishness, which must begin with a start of recognition of just exactly how selfish we really are, and responsibility, which has to do with taking ownership of one's own stuff, and also a combination of the words response and ability, or in other words, an ability to respond to changing circumstances. And indeed, we'll know victory when we begin to respond unselfishly to other people and to the world we encounter. Identification as the illusion relates to our own sense of identity, and it's at the very core of what we think we are. We might identify with any number of roles we play in life and say, I'm a mother, I'm a father, a parent, I am such and so worker, and our other identifications might be slightly more aspirational, such as I'm an artistic genius, or the king or queen of this or that. Some identifications can be negative and debilitating. For example, I am a failure or a bad person. We might also identify with our body, or with our dreams and imagination, with our beliefs, or with our feelings. But these things are all liable to change. So at some level, identifications are a cocktail of emotions, belief, imaginations, and behavior that really all belong in the lower part of our consciousness. but which we attribute to our real self in this illusion. So some 20th century existential philosophers, notably Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir, were concerned precisely with this illusion, and they used the term bad faith to describe the process in which a person gradually forfeits their ability to act with genuine authenticity and freedom because they've replaced their self-worth and their sense of self with all sorts of false norms and values, shoulds and oughts. Now, any attempt to remove the props of the false self will inevitably be met with much resistance, because it can be extremely painful and difficult to confront the potentially abysmal sense of emptiness at the center of what we are. In fact, when the false self is dismantled, it can even lead to a kind of existential collapse for someone who doesn't have a genuine connection with spirituality. And by spirituality, I most definitely do not mean religiosity or faith in other people's faith. This is about having an intimate and simple connection with reality itself, and however limited a way, it's an awareness of all containing nothingness in which you, me, and everything that has ever been is happening. You can't see it, you can't taste it, because it's not anything. Without this basic awareness, removing the illusion of identity leads to a horrible sense of hollowness and to thoughts such as, if I'm not anything, then I must be nothing, i.e. nihilism. So to emphasize, no faith in other people's faith, no set of beliefs, no warm fluffy feeling can act as a substitute for our own direct experience, because that real experience is not something other or unknown. It's actually always been there for everyone at all times, hidden in the background, covered up by changing forms. And until we begin to dismantle the false self, the ground of our being is too absolute, it's too simple, and too obvious even to be noticed through all the noise. The illusion of self-identity is also linked to the vice of pride. And nowadays, pride is usually used in a very positive sense to do with having positive self-regard, so we're talking about something slightly different. I suppose we are all fairly good at something in life, even if it takes us over half our life to figure out what that is. And a lot of our life's achievements might be actually due to outside factors, such as our genetic makeup, our family upbringing, our environment, community where we grew up. And yet we tend to attribute our positive achievements, such as our material wealth, career, success, and any particular skills that we've got, like eloquence or physical strength, as being somehow innate personal qualities that are just part of the inner us, which is all very normal, and we know this self-serving attributional bias is important in maintaining normal, healthy self-esteem. However, when we start to tackle the illusion of identification, we begin a process of amplifying this effect significantly. And this amplification can lead to some really serious false identification with a set of beliefs or behaviors. The vice of pride can be thought of as an over-attachment to the fruits of action. And indeed, pride can help us increase our motivation and performance, but all vices are ultimately vices and need to be first accepted and then overcome. When we're genuinely committed to the work, the powers that be will find ways of removing our false identification. And those usually involve in bursting our heavily inflated bubbles of pride. The next illusion is intrinsically formal and concerned with upholding the law and maintaining strong and firm boundaries. And this leads to a sense of permanence. What is will always be. This illusion shares some traits with security, but it can run even deeper. At some point, our bodies are definitely going to expire and die. We'll lose everything we currently hold dear and cherish: our family, our friends, our possessions, our status, absolutely everything. And even though we already know this on some level, some act as if it's never going to happen. And this illusion can convince some that we can win any battle. It can manifest as some kind of power fantasy. One example of this is the myth of progress, in which we are convinced that human ingenuity and technology will gradually conquer the chaotic forces of nature and subjugate our planet entirely to our will. That sense of invincibility can be exaggerated significantly when fighting for a just cause or a righteous crusade. This sense comes from being fused with a higher principle, for example, a holy war. The higher principle taps into something which is transpersonal, but only on a tribal level. When we take that kind of sword and use it against people or nature, we get ourselves in danger of meeting our own judgment, which can easily generate into cruelty and violence. So how strong are we really, and where does our strength actually come from? It certainly takes real strength and real courage to leave the sword alone. And yet there are maybe times when we need to invoke the power of the law, and certain occasions where we need to defend important structures that are of great value, but we still need to be very careful that we're not acting out the illusion in the form of self-preservation. Part of the nature of leadership, especially of great leadership, when operating out of infallibility, is the ability and the authority to actually decide what happens and to act as an author in the creative process in making reality. The illusion is always right and cannot be wrong. This illusion comes about because power transmits authority and acts in positive polarity to identification, when it's really meant to be more of a servant than a king. It's meant to act as a giver and a benevolent transmitter of all that power and inspiration that is itself received as a gift from above. It is also supposed to convert influences which in their raw, unprocessed nature will be too much for the consciousness into a perpetual loving, kind, merciful outpouring that sustains life itself. So although our role is to give freely and leave all that controlling and shaping and management to the powers that be, the sheer power of infallibility can easily go to one's head and bring about all sorts of nasty, overbearing vices, including bigotry, tyranny, hypocrisy, and gluttony. But the illusion is that we are blind to these vices because at that level, we may really think that we can do no wrong. And that is why the virtues have to be instilled in obedience and humility, because only they can tell us where it could be going wrong. Through obedience to the influences of the previous mentioned disciplines and obedience in the ability to accept all that we have, has been given to us freely as a gift, and it can be taken away just as easily. And of course, if we don't develop humility for ourselves, then life itself will teach us humility through various kinds of humiliation. Moving on into the illusion of death. How can it be that death itself is an illusion? The kind of death that we find difficult to grasp is the death of form and structure. And only that which has taken on form or structure can really be destroyed. The actual ground of our being, the formless essence of life itself, remains, because it's not actually made of anything which can be changed or destroyed, and it's eternal because it's never actually entered into the time stream. And beyond all of that, constituent forces and forms were fundamentally a part of that nothingness. Still, to have a process of creation, we have to have form as well as force in that mix. And at the root of all form is death, which wants to hold on to things forever and ever and ever. The spiritual experience of death is that of the vision of sorrow in which we encounter the divine as a dark and sterile mother or as a black and bitter sea. And eventually we all have to embrace that experience. It is represented by symbols of containment like the coffin, the chalice, and the womb. And anything that is placed inside them undergoes a complete transformation. Nothing will ever be the same, ever again. There will be a complete loss of all that form and structure we've gotten used to. But from that position, it's going to be an experience of gestation, and because of that, death is an illusion. Moving along this journey into the consciousness, there is the illusion of independence. At the level of personality and ego, independence can be of great virtue. It can give us the ability to respond, think, and act as individuals without being held back by a herd mentality or by our own negative patterns. But at this level, we are way beyond all of that. Here is where our consciousness emanates directly from the singular point of all creation, and because it emerges directly from our crown chakra, here we are able to see the Creator face to face, so to speak, and experience complete at one-ment with the crown of unity, overcoming any illusion of separation. And yet at this point are two faces. You have one looking to God, and the other which, as the Father of the universe, looks upon death, infallibility, invincibility, identification, projection, internal mapping, security, and all that is physical, and in doing so pours out all of the force that seeds the universe. And it's from here that the illusion of independence springs. Because in the act of instigating the process of creation comes the initial split, comes the beginning of duality and the forming of an I-thou relationship with all that is. This is the beginning of the illusion of separation and independence, and although this illusion is way up into our consciousness, it resonates all the way down as well. We have to learn over and over and over again that we're never truly independent or separate from the powers that be, and that we are continually being guided and directed by Spirit in everything we do. The illusion of attainment, or that will ever be an ultimate end goal at a point in which we will have done everything possible and creation will be perfect and complete. Although perhaps the aspiration of attainment isn't necessarily negative in itself, in the same way that ancient mariners might navigate by a star knowing that they'll never really reach it. Every civilization, including our own, has myths and stories about a heaven of perfection and rest, or a nirvana, a complete cessation of experience, and these myths might even refer to temporary states of consciousness where we could rest in nothingness for a while. But we can't live there forever. In some myths, there are even stories about spiritual beings that are there to help the recently deceased in their experience in the afterlife, because sometimes people will get trapped in a place they imagined was a heaven, a place of ultimate attainment. But why do we keep coming back for more? And why do we keep doing this to ourselves over and over again, despite all the growing pains and the confusion and suffering that seem to always accompany that manifestation? Life has a phase of activity, and then it's followed by a phase of rest, and then another phase of activity, and another phase of rest, and so on and so on. Just like in the breath, an out breath, and the in breath, and the out breath. Just like the summer and the winter, just like life and death. They are one of the same thing. Neither is permanent, and there doesn't need to be a final destination, and there doesn't need to be an ultimate purpose other than the unity and sanctity of life itself. It just is what it is. Now, I haven't told you anything your subconscious doesn't already know. It knows what is really going on, and is watching your conscious half hustle and bustle, getting trapped and wrapped up in all of these illusions, just waiting for you to stop and remember. Rest your mind now. Relax the contents of your skull. Scan your body from head to toe now, looking and searching for any sensations, and see if you can grow these sensations bigger. Remember back to that feeling you get when you have butterflies in your stomach. You know that feeling was physically manifested by thought. What was it that gave you that feeling? Are you able to manifest the butterflies again right now? This ends with a story about twins, premature babies in the hospital barely holding on to life. Standard procedure of this particular hospital is to separate the twins and put them in incubators and hook them up to life support systems and try to sustain the life in them. Now, the nurse who was assigned to care for these twins noticed that upon separation, one of the baby's vital signs began to drop significantly. And this little baby girl was dying, and the nurse knew it. She could feel it. Something, somehow, from somewhere, sparked this nurse to ignore protocol, to break the rules and do what she knew in her heart was the right thing to do and what needed to be done. With tears in her eyes, this nurse opened the incubator, scooped up the little baby girl as carefully as she could, and placed her next to her twin brother. And you know what happened next? The brother turned towards his sister and put his arm around her, and immediately the little baby girl's vitals soared, and she was restored. These twins are alive and thriving today. If there was any type of feeling that could well up inside of you that you can feel right now, you grow that feeling, you access it and connect to it and use it when you need to. Remember how this feeling feels, so you can learn how to manifest thought into form. It is the most powerful force in the universe, and it can be one of the easiest or most difficult feelings to manifest depending on you. It is your defense, your answer, your guide, your intuition, and your power. Some call it love, but love is such a wide open relative term that it can be easily manipulated, so let's not put a name on it or a label on it, because you can't. It's a feeling, a knowing, a driving force that can be felt throughout the universe, connecting one being to another instantly, no matter how many miles apart they are. Slowly start to bring your awareness back into your body now. Feel your chest cavity and take a deep breath. And another breath. Long. Take even longer with your exhale. And take your time. When you are ready, remember the intention you set for yourself at the beginning. Is it still the same? So what now? Inhale to receive. Exhale to let go. Watch the moments unfold before you. Act appropriately, authentically, with the heightened state of awareness and knowledge of these illusions. Remember that daily meditation will help to empty out the busy, overactive mind and help to keep you grounded in reality as it really is. Know yourself to heal yourself and in turn heal others. Open your eyes. Feel your fingers and toes start to move, and slowly begin to allow yourself to fidget once again and stretch. We exit the same way we came in. Take a deep breath. One last breath before we go. Inhale to receive. Exhale to let go. Namaste.